Hello everybody. This is our second lesson. It's about language and tries to answer what language is about, right? So there are some ideas, some definitions, some phrases, but what it is important here is to really understand, to have your own view of language, your own definition of what language is. So I think that the most important one is this that says it's the human capacity for self-awareness and abstract thought. By language, we are able to know who we are, what we think, our abstract thoughts, our inner thoughts. And that makes a distinction, yes, between all animals in the world. Its ability to transfer complex information, to discuss the meaning of events and possible outcomes of alternative actions, to share feelings, to share ideas. Language is often viewed as a vehicle of thought, a system of expression that mediates the transfer of thought from one person to another. In everyday life, language also serves equally important socially and emotional functions. That is from Finnegan. You see what important it is. Sometimes we don't have an extent of what important language is in our lives. And some of the basic questions that linguistics tries to answer have to do with what is language, how does language work, what do all languages have in common, what range of variation is found among languages, how does human language differ from animal communication. That this is one of the key questions you're going to answer in this lesson. How does a child learn to speak? And we have already seen that in didactics from behaviorism point of view. How does one write down and analyze an unwritten language? Why do languages change? To what extent are social class differences reflected in language? And there are so many other questions, and you can find them in Finnegan, in the chapter I have selected for you in Finnegan. So, you know that this is a never-ending list of things that linguistics tries to cover. And of course that we have already talked about linguistics, and Lyon says that it is the scientific study of language by means of controlled and empirically verified observations with reference to some general theory of language structure. This is what we are going to do in next lessons. We are going to learn different theories for analyzing the structure of language according to linguistics and why linguistics is a science, etc. And also it is a scientific or logical examination of any aspect and property of language, always based on a theoretical framework. And there is something that all languages share. Yeah. One of them is the ability for an individual to model the world for him or himself and to communicate using language was probably the single most advantageous evolutionary adaptation of the human species. Okay, so this is something characteristic, the way in which we communicate through language. Okay, that was the evolutionary adaptation. Languages are all made possible by the same genetic information. That is to say, that no matter where I was born, I would have been able to learn that language, no matter how difficult it seems to be. Right, so it seems that we have genetic information about language. And they are all processed by the brain in basically the same ways. They all share certain fundamental design features. This is what we are going to see in this lesson, design features of language that are fundamental and basically in all languages all over the world, and structural characteristics that enable them to work the way they do. The sounds of language and their combinations are limited and systematic. All languages follow similar constraints on how they can combine words into phrases and sentences, and that happens, for example, in English, that word order is very important. You cannot organize language in the way you want. And another characteristic, another universal property is modularity. So language is a modular system, so people produce and interpret language using a set of component subsystems in a coordinated way. So we have phonetics, so the phonology, morphology, the study word, the syntax. So there are modular, there are components and they are all coordinated. I need the context to add to the sentences, etc. Okay, and well, I want to explain this chart. It's important to understand the language has three phases. And the fundamental function of any language system is to provide verbal expression for thought and feeling. Okay, verbal expression for thought and feeling in a particular context in which the hearer can interpret the speaker's intention. So we have expression for thought and feeling in a particular context, and this is linked by grammar. I need grammar to link the expression, okay, with meaning, in which the hearer can interpret the speaker's intention. The context is fundamental. So meaning refers to the senses and reference of these elements of expressions. And expression encompasses the words, the phrases, the sentence, intonation, and stress. Okay? And the context refers to the social situation in which expression is uttered and includes whatever has been expressed earlier in that situation. So, the grammar and interpretation is linked by the context. I need the context to, I need to use definite words or phrases to make that idea understandable for the hearer. So, for that, I need signs. And semiotics is the study of signs, and it's a field of study that links many diverse disciplines, among them linguistics, anthropology, philosophy, zoology, and computer science. They need signs. If you understand signs, you will understand how messages are transmitted. That's very important. So, but what is a sign? That is a very good question that you always have to say. Well, when you're studying and you say definition, you have to make sure that you understand every component of that definition. So you say, well, it's a study of sign, if you understand signs, etc. What is a sign? Okay? So it's very important that you really understand every single phrase you utter. So, communication relies on using something to stand for something else. For example, words. I say, please, can you give me a cup of tea? Okay, so I need to use those words, okay, to stand for something else. Each of these things that stand for other things is technically known as a sign. Sign is a unit of communication structure. Because their content is conceptual, all signs are associated with some meaning. And then we're going to learn a bit different types of signs. Okay, for example, an open sign hanging in the window of a business. Open. Okay, so it is a sign that stands for something else. It says, okay, you can get here, you can buy something, you can do whatever you want. Okay, it's available for you. I understand that. The sound of a fire engine, that is a sign. The smell of smoke, a sign that something is burning, that you have to get out of the house. Words such as tree or a picture of a drawing. What about some random scratches? Is that a sign? It will depend on what? On what will depend? Will these scratches depend on? Very good. If the word was context, that could have been very good. Okay, describe what you're seeing here. Is that a sign? You may say, no, teacher, I don't understand. What is this about? But if we see that in a context, those are records of death inside the gas chambers of Auschwitz. Okay, it is meaningful because we know what happened there. Okay, that is Panorama, painting by Twombly in 1855. Okay, you may say, well, I don't understand anything, but if the author comes here and explains you, maybe it will have sense for us. What if the scratches look like this? Or like this? Okay, different signs, different meaning. You see, from this, how it changes. And there were two main approaches we're not going to see. We're going to learn about them later on, but, well, we have just an approach. Passive knowledge, it would be. We have Ferdinand de Saussure and Charles Sanders Peirce. Okay, mostly at the same time. There are two main approaches. And de Saussure talked about what is a sign, but what is a sign? So he describes the sign. He said that the sign is composed by a signified and a signifier. A signified exists in the real world and is mentally represented by the signals, by the sign's conceptual content. It could be a tree, or it could be an abstract idea, a perception, or a feeling. Okay, it exists in the real world, and the signifier is that part of a sign that stimulates at least one sense organ of the receiver of a message. It can be a word, a scent, a gesture, or an electrical frequency. So it has to do with two sides of the same coin, alright? So we have the signified, which is the real object, and the signifier is what it stimulates one sense organ of the receiver. It is the word, it could be the scent, it could be the gesture, okay? The signifier. And one of the characteristics is sometimes the signified and the signifier are arbitrary, that there is no relation. Like if I have a picture of a tree and the word tree, it could be tree in English, árbol in Spanish, okay, and many other ways in other languages. Sometimes it's arbitrary, okay. And what is a token? It's an individual instances of a sign. In the sentence, the baby threw the rattle, there are 5 word tokens, but only 4 signs. Why? Because the, you see, the and the are repeated here. So there is one sign with the same meaning. Okay, that's why there are 4 signs. Okay, so Saussure believed that signs do not represent reality but construct it. We come to know the word through language. Okay, so it doesn't represent but we construct, because we understand, we know the word through language. Okay, say lápiz, agua, toma el agua. We start knowing about the word through language. Signs reflect the system they are found in, and the relationship between the sign and the signifier is not a matter of personal choice. It is because the sign is arbitrary that it knows no law other than tradition. So if I have a picture of a tree and the word tree, it is arbitrary, the relationship. I mean, I cannot infer that árbol means a tree because I don't know Spanish, for example. Okay, so here again, the idea of arbitrary and non-arbitrary, it will be very important for understanding the difference between animal communication and human language. So non-arbitrary signs, they have a direct, usually causal relationship to the things they indicate. For example, smoke is a non-arbitrary sign of fire. Clouds, a non-arbitrary sign of impending rain. Okay? Sometimes onomatopoeias are non-arbitrary, right? Because if they were wow, I get to understand. And arbitrary sounds, there is no inherent or casual connection with what they signify or indicate. For example, traffic lights, railroad crossings, indicators, wedding rings, national flags, because they are conventional representations, arbitrary signs can be changed. So if one day government decides to change the Argentinian flag, okay, that could be possible, why not? And the relationship is generally arbitrary between words and what they represent. Language is a system of arbitrary signs. It has to be absolutely clear, this point, okay? Well, okay, that was taught or designed or coined by de Saussure. Charles Sanders Peirce had thought about many different types of signs, but the 3 most important are indexical, icons, and symbols. Indexes. The index is when the signifier is not arbitrary but is connected to the signified in some way, either physically or causally. For example, photographs. Okay, they are produced through the reflection of light to the subject. Okay, so it's absolutely not arbitrary because it shows just what it is. I smell smoke. The smell of smoke could be said to signify fire. It's not arbitrary but directly connected to the thing it signifies. Okay, an icon. In an icon, the signifier is not totally arbitrary but resembles the signified in some ways. Okay, for example, a cartoon, a portrait, sounds that mimic such as onomatopoeia, icons. And the symbol, the signifier, is totally arbitrary and conventional. Words and numbers in general fit into this category, words and numbers. There is no reason why number 2 should